Anxiety is a feeling of dread and unease. It can make you feel restless and speed up your heart. Anxiety can be a normal reaction to stress, like when you have a project at work or a school test. But people with an anxiety disorder have a different story. People who have an anxiety disorder, anxiety becomes a big part of their life. Instead of being present during some instances, their anxiety gets worse over time and affects every walk of their life. Anxiety disorders have existed since the late 1800s, but it wasn't fully recognized till 1980. In 1950s and 60s, anxiety disorder wasn't recognized unless it was severe.
What is your anxiety like?
Today, my anxiety is pretty much under control with medication and the fact that I don't work anymore, so I can just relax more. But I still have anxiety meeting new people because that's always been a problem of mine. But yeah, I try to do things to relax. I started doing some cross stitching, but yeah, that's mainly it. When I have to talk to people is when I have the most anxiety today, I would say.
What was growing up in the baby boomer generation like?
It was pretty free. You got to go outside, ride your bike, play games, stay out until dark. Nobody was really checking on you that much. Walked to school, walked home for lunch, walked back to school, walked home. Dinner, sometimes that wasn't so great. My mom didn't have a car. She didn't know how to drive, even if we had a car. So the 1 year that I walked the most was about a mile away from home. So you walked a mile and then you walked a mile back at lunch, had just enough time to eat, and then you walked back. But nobody was concerned about anyone getting kidnapped. Didn't even cross anybody's mind. Same thing when we moved closer to a school. We still walked. Our high school, we walked. So yeah, things were, you either walked or you rode your bike. And that's kind of it.
What was your childhood like with anxiety?
I was very, very shy. My first grade class, they wanted to kick me out. I think because I didn't talk and I sucked my thumb. And my mom went, no, we're not staying in this school. We're moving on to a different school, where I continued to be shy, but evidently they didn't care, so they kept me. I don't think I got over that until maybe I was 40, if then. And so, at any rate, yeah, I would get anxious about things, anything that happened at school. And I would come home and I'd be upset, and my mom would try to talk to me, and I wouldn't say anything. What's wrong? And I'd say nothing, and then I'd still cry, and then she'd get mad because I wasn't explaining to her how I felt. But I'm not sure I could have explained, and if I had explained, I don't think she would have understood. Anyway, so I like to stay in my room and read my books, and I was happy doing that. And I found some friends in school, in high school, that we did, so I got busy doing some things like being in plays and just running around with a small crowd of people, and that was good. Then I got married, and I was had a baby, and I don't know what I was really worrying about. It was a lot of stuff, but it would end up being a painful, upset stomach. Anytime I was anxious, it was always my stomach that it would go to. And I went to the doctor, and he ran so many tests to try to find out what's wrong with her stomach. And they all came back negative. Everything was fine. And I went, for the checkup after all the tests. And he said, "Well, I don't understand. Do you drink?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Do you smoke?" And I said, "No." "Do you eat spicy food?" "No." And he said, "Do you worry?" And I said, "Yeah, I think everybody worries." And he said, "Stop it." And I kind of laughed because, how do you stop it? So anyway, we just kept going on with life because there wasn't anything else you could do but stop it, which off and on for years I had stomach problems related to anxiety.
How do you cope with your anxiety now?
Okay, somewhere probably 20 years ago, whenever Allison was getting married, which I don't know how many years ago that was now.
1996.
96? Yeah, Carolyn was going through a hard time. This wedding was coming up. We had to iron these stupid dresses, and it was like impossible. And so anyway, I was a wreck. I work, and at that time, my symptoms were the stomach, an inability to focus on anything, getting very worked up over the littlest thing. I'm trying to think, there's at least one more. Just obsessing over things. If I got a thought in my head, it stayed there and it went round and round and round and round. Now, I get to go to the doctor, and the doctor says, "I think you need an antidepressant." And I was not thrilled about that, but someone that I knew and trusted told me that she also was on an antidepressant and it helped. So I did that, and it just was like boom. I could focus, everything was better. And it wasn't like I had a change in my personality, because I don't think I really did. It's just I could relax and focus and see that it was a little thing, not a huge thing that I was thinking about. And so I've continued to use that for ever since. Sometimes things have happened, something dramatic at work, or when my mother got seriously ill, the doctor upped the amount of medication, and I've just been doing that and trying to put myself in positions where I have to talk to people, and the more you do it, the easier it gets, and you get to know people and be more relaxed with them. So I think I cope pretty well. I get anxious when family members have a difficult time, either health-wise or school-wise or anything like that. But I try to just carry on and not overthink things.
According to statistics, baby boomers have shown the biggest increase in anxiety. 21% of baby boomers have been diagnosed with anxiety at some point in their lives. Articles on anxiety have increased rapidly in the 1980s, but that doesn't mean Generation X was diagnosed as kids or even teens.
What is your anxiety like?
Like in general? Yeah.
What
okay.
are some symptoms
So,
of your anxiety? What does it feel like?
There are multiple ways that I have anxiety. One biggie is overthinking. I kind of describe it as springs in my head. When I'm having a really, really bad time, thoughts are just like pew, 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 pew. They're just bouncing like crazy. And it can be really tiring to just constantly be thinking. So that the thoughts, overthinking, let's say I said something to a colleague at work, and then I start to think, oh God, that I probably shouldn't have said that. Oh, they hate me. Just that kind of social anxiety. I hate large crowds. I like to be in control of things. I have a really hard time when I don't have a plan. So that, I think, kind of gives you a sense of the whirlwind that I live.
What is your anxiety like in general?
My anxiety is like a pit in my stomach, this ache that doesn't really go away. I can remember it back, and we have stories of me being even a baby, just not wanting to be away from my mom. But from the moment I can remember to 18, 19, when I finally got some treatment, I had this constant ache in my stomach. I overthink things, replay things. I'm worried about everything. And I know I don't need to be worried about all of these things. But then because I'm focusing on everything at the same level of like intensity, I would forget things that I needed to do, which then would make me upset, and then I would cry or get really irritable or annoyed. I have more of I'm a silly person just in general of my personality, but I could be really irritated with people and have a short fuse and sometimes I'd have a really good sense of humor about being teased, and other times I wouldn't, depending on where I was in my overthinking and irrationality about things. And so it was kind of, it was constantly a spiral. And I would say that nagging pit in my stomach was always the number one symptom. What was growing up like in your generation as a child?
I would say it was a lot more free than what I did with my kids. I guess I'm going to explain how my role as a parent, I didn't want to let my babies out of my sight. And I think for me, because I was born in the 70s, my early childhood was we could just do and be and go outside and not worry about anything. But then in the 80s with the boy Adam who got abducted, that completely changed my worldview, to the point that in 4th grade, my younger sister was in kindergarten, and I got chosen to be a crossing guard. And I gave up being a crossing guard because I wanted to be with my sister, because I was afraid she was going to get abducted and have her head cut off. Because the other thing, like my childhood was, we watched the news every night. We ate dinner and then we watched the news. And so from a very early age, I was learning about Iran taking hostages, the gas price, how good was the dollar doing. And then when Adam, I don't remember what his last name was, but when he was taken, it was just like changed completely.
So what was growing up like in your generation?
Growing up in my generation, it was a lot of hearing your parents say, go outside and play. And you did. And because at that point, when I was growing up, having air conditioning in your house was not like, I'm thinking summer just because it's summer right now, but being outside really wasn't that much different than being inside, being cooked in an oven because it was hot. So you would go outside and you were kind of free to find your friends and go and do things, ride your bike, go out into, everybody, you would kind of create clubs or play house, that kind of stuff, problem solve with each other, which I don't see kids doing as much now. My sister was aware of the news being on when I was a kid, when we were kids. I remember it being on, but I didn't really pay any attention to it. I know she worried about that kind of stuff. I didn't. I was really kind of blissfully aware or unaware of what was going on in the world, so that really never factored into what I thought about. It was watching cartoons Saturday morning and going and finding friends to play with. I remember very specific toys that we played with. Barbie dolls was a really big, strawberry shortcake, Care Bears, that kind of thing. So, yeah. What was your childhood like with anxiety? And do you have any specific memories?
My third birthday. It was terrifying. I can picture the dining room. I can remember standing on top of a chair, and I had a beautiful cake and everybody singing happy birthday, and I just remember like trying to go into myself because it was just, there were too many people there. It was crazy. And just, I just wanted to disappear. I like to call myself the wallflower because that's where I'm most comfortable. I like to be on the outside. So like in terms of friends, I didn't really have a lot of friends. I didn't really want to spend a lot of time with other people. I was just more content to just be me and be by myself. And so.
How hard was it with living with your anxiety as a child?
I think it was harder. I think it was harder when you go to school, when you're forced to be with a larger group of people. Dealing with like classmates, teachers. When I was home, I didn't have a problem, I don't think. Because I think mom let me be. I don't know, does that answer the question?
I think so.
Okay.
What was your childhood like with anxiety?
Ugh. I can't remember my childhood without anxiety. I was, well, the thing was, kids back then in the 80s were not diagnosed with anxiety. So I was not diagnosed formally until I was 19. So that would have been like 1999. So no, 97, 98-ish. But my childhood was a lot of crying, a lot of fear of abandonment. I was so attached to my mom. Screamed every day. I still remember her dropping me off at preschool. I really feel bad for my mom thinking back about that time, because I would scream and cry for her all the time. And I also feel bad for my dad because I never screamed for him. Like, I love my dad, but I was just very attached to my mom, and the fear of abandonment was huge for me. Don't really know why. I never was abandoned. But even there's stories of me as like a 1 to 2 year old, and I cried the entire time my parents, God forbid, went to go see a movie, and I cried the entire time they were gone. So my poor grandma and grandpa had to listen to that. But my childhood was crying, pit in my stomach, but I was also, I think I was a pretty happy kid too when my mom was around. As long as my mom was around, I was cool.
How hard was it being a kid with anxiety in the 80s?
Well, it wasn't easy, because I do remember, like, my first day in kindergarten, I'm sitting there crying and my mom's trying to leave, and I'm sitting around with these other girls and they're just staring at me, and nobody knew, including me, what was wrong. And so I did feel like there was something wrong with me, but it also felt normal. Like, why isn't everybody else losing their minds by being here? I felt like everybody always had a pit in their stomach. I had never known life without it, so that was my normal. So it went from abandonment until I was older, and then it switched to like perfectionism. And so then my anxiety transitioned to sports and school and social relationships, like replaying those conversations. Should I have said that? why did I do that? Oh, that person totally noticed that. And and then that just starts to spiral. So it went from when I got into about middle school, those lovely puberty years, that became where, and that's never fun, which then spiraled into not necessarily an eating, well, I didn't eat well, but I then tried managing as I got older, like high school, by exercising all the time. And anytime I ate or anytime I felt anxious, I would work out. And so it was trying to get some relief that way. But then that spiraled out of control too. How is your anxiety now?
Much better, thanks to medication. I guess, should I talk about, okay, so, I guess I'll backtrack. So my high school years, sophomore year, I fell for a guy. He didn't pay any attention to me at all. And I thought the way to go about getting his attention was to lose weight. And so my older sister and I went on a diet, and I kind of took it 1,000 steps too far, to the point where I went from 150 pounds to 105. I was eating less than 800 calories a day, exercising like crazy. And that was like the ultimate control. Like I had control of everything that went in my mouth, and I had control over my schedule, but I really didn't have any control, because I was a hot mess. I was mean. I was reclusive. I was obviously extremely depressed, and the way that I snapped out of it was basically my mom sitting me down and saying, if you don't start eating, we're taking you to therapy. And it was like, well, I don't want to do therapy. So then I started eating, and it flipped a switch, and I ended up having problems with obsessive compulsive overeating. And so then I went from 105 pounds to 180 pounds in a relatively short period of time. I would come home from school. I stopped exercising. I would come home from school, and I would just eat, to the point where I felt sick. And then I don't know, that was, I guess, my drug of choice at that point. So I didn't have a handle on that. And I ended up changing doctors before I went to college. And the doctor was a wonderful man. And I was complaining about my jaw being swollen because I grind my teeth, because of course I do. And and I just lost it. I was in tears about my jaw, and he's like, there's something more than just your jaw. And at that time, he offered medication, and I said, absolutely not. But we worked out to get therapy for my eating disorders. And so we got it all set up in college. I joined a support group. I ended up doing much better. And then I found a boyfriend, and things were great. And then we broke up, and I ended up becoming very suicidal. And I realized I needed help. And I told Mom, I said, I think I need to go back to therapy, and I think I need something more. And so I ended up going to therapy, ended up being prescribed a very low dose of Prozac, Mom and Dad came to visit, and I remember Aunt Nancy sent me a card, and she had said, you know, that she's had been on medication, Uncle David, and you know, it's not something to be upset about. It's a tool to help you feel better. But mom was like, why can't you just be happy? And I always laugh at that. Like, sure, I'll just be happy. Yeah, there, I'm happy. It doesn't work like that. So, in my family, I was the first one to get the ball rolling, and it wasn't too long after that Mom, she realized, you know, and I always equate it to, if you have high blood pressure, you're going to take high blood pressure medication. If you have diabetes, you're going to take the medication you need for that. And this isn't any different than that. So, that's kind of how I've dealt with it.
How's your anxiety now as an adult woman?
It's pretty good. Let's see, like I said, I was 19. I was in a really bad spot. It was after my freshman year in college. I was up to working out 3 to 4 times a day. And not mentally well. Like, I cried a lot. My poor boyfriend, who's now my husband, he had to deal with me not being very rational, with me not being very nice to him. So I ended up going to the doctor because my sister and then my mom had gotten on medication. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to try this. And so I went, did counseling, talked with a dietitian, which was probably one of the best things I've ever done to kind of help me understand how my body works. I've been on medication since then. My husband was not pleased at the time with me getting on medication. He didn't like that, and I told him, tough. It was the first time that I hadn't felt that pit in my stomach, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is what it feels like to not be nervous all the time. And he didn't know, because he does not have anxiety or anything near that. And I said, you have forgotten how I treated you and how irrational and just not nice, short-tempered I could be. And he doesn't remember this conversation, but I do, because it solidified that I really was feeling better. I had to change medications, and I had to go off of one and then wait and then go on the new medication. And I waited a little bit longer without any medication because I wanted to kind of remind him. And he one day said to me, when are you going back on that medication? And I was like, thank you. Like, you have now remembered. And he's never once asked again. I still work out. I still find a lot of pleasure in working out. But I don't need it in order to help me with my anxiety. I did have to go up a little bit in my dosage after I had my second child. I tried going off the medication, both pregnancies I had, did not work. That pit was immediately back, and I was just like, I can't do this. And but I guess I forgot to talk about this, but I have like stomach issues when I'm not on medication. It's like I have flare-ups, and it's awful. Now, if I get upset to the point where I'm having those kind of awful bathroom issues, it's because it truly is something really, really bad, and I really should be upset about it. where before it was probably 2 to 3 times a month. And there's nothing in this world that should be getting you so stressed out 2 to 3 times a month. So it's being handled really well now.
I would say I had a really hard time with my mom, and it took a lot of therapy for me to get I held a lot of resentment toward my parents, toward my teachers, toward my doctors, because there I was, a person who obviously was in distress and nothing happened. And the fact that therapy is like you better do this or type of thing. And like mom would do things that, I'll be specific. One time in the bathroom, she was like, "You need to wash your glasses." And I was like, "Okay." And she's like, "Well, I had a boy one time tell me that I would look pretty if I just washed my glasses more often." And it was like, and when I was doing acting, and she bought me breath spray. It was like, "You need this." I was like, "Gee, thanks, Mom." So it was like little things like that I just always felt like I was under a microscope of, I'm not, and I didn't have fashion sense, and I, I'm just me, and I didn't follow trends, and I just didn't fit in. And the fact that I had a mom who was doing this, and I know now that she was trying to be helpful. It just, in the moment, it wasn't helpful at all. It really hurt. But being a mom now, I know exactly what it's like. Like I keep thinking, oh, I'm so thankful I had my mom and dad, and they put up with everything that I put them through.
Can you give us a memory of being anxious as a kid?
There's so many. I have so many memories. But I think the biggest one that I have several in preschool, but the biggest one I remember that really singed into my brain because I had that fear of abandonment. In kindergarten, I had half-day kindergarten, and I lived right down the street from our school. So my sister and I, we would walk to school together, and of course I didn't want to go to school, so I'm screaming for my sister, whose classroom was right across the hall from me. So, I feel bad for that too. But then I would get done midway through the day, but she wasn't, because she was in 4th grade. And so I would walk home with another little girl that lived on our street. And she would drop me off at my grandma's house, which was only like 5 houses down from the school. It was really super close. Well, one day I go into my grandma's house, and I get to the back door, I try to open it, and it's locked. So then I go into the garage, and the car is not there. And I can still, it was probably I don't think I've ever had a panic attack as an adult, but I think that probably was a panic attack, because I can still remember breathing so heavily and crying, like it kind of, bringing it up, because I really feel sad for that little girl, because I was so scared that people had left me. And so I'm running down the road trying to catch up with the other little girl who lived down the street, and she wasn't hearing me. So I ended up stopping at my next door neighbor. We lived 10 houses down from my grandma. All of this happened on the same street. So I stop at my neighbor's house, knock on her front door, she's not there. So I'm going around to the back to try her back door. And when I started kindergarten, I was the youngest of 3, and my mom decided to go back to school. So she was, I think, in nursing school at the time. And for whatever reason, her class had gotten canceled, or for some reason she wasn't at class yet. And right when I was walking to the back door of our neighbors, my mom was walking out our back door to get in the car to go to class. And she sees me, and I was already losing it, but the relief that I had too, that I found my mom. But then come to find out, my grandma had been shopping, and the line took longer to check out, and she was at the store and driving home. I think she was crying because she knew how upset I was going to be. So it was, we all kind of remember that moment because it was pretty significant. How do you cope with your anxiety now?
I'm still on medication. I am also, so I'm now dealing with my second bout of cancer. And I have a therapy appointment planned with, I forget what they're called. It's like therapy for cancer patients. Because I obviously have a lot of issues that are revolving around that. Gardening would be another thing I do. I don't stress about my garden. It's just like I plant it and then I let God take care of it. I definitely appreciate that I have my family close by, because we definitely get together an awful lot. I don't really have friends. I have family. And that definitely, being able to talk openly with my family definitely helps. And I would say I'm thankful for my husband, because Joe, he's a really laid back guy, and while I don't talk to him a lot about this stuff, when I do, he's always very, he knows just what to say. So I would say is my coping mechanism.
How do you cope with it now without like medication? What other things do you use to cope with anxiety?
Well, I work out. I still, I go on walks with my dogs. I don't know, medication is like a really big one. I think I do a lot of self-talk too. Like if I am starting to get amped up a little bit, I'm able to kind of rationalize my way back down. I think because the medication is the number one thing that helps me. But I do a lot of self-talk.
It doesn't have to be a long answer.
Yeah.
I can think of it.
Yep. What are your thoughts about anxiety now versus when you were a kid?
Like personally, or in terms of like society?
Both.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll answer the question this way. As a teacher, I do not keep my struggles silent. I have used my experiences as a springboard for a lot of conversations in my classroom, just because I think growing up, it was a hush hush, don't talk about that. Or it just wasn't on the radar at all. Like the level of shyness that I had as a kid should have been alarm bells going off. I think if I were a kid nowadays, I would definitely probably have a 504 plan where I could have been given, a timeout, place to decompress. Both of my kids both of my kids had IEPs, 504s, and it's just because they needed those extra ways of dealing with life, and because they have anxieties too. So I think growing up, the support systems weren't there. I think nowadays, they're definitely more visible. And it's not always medication. Medication's not always the way to go about it, but the number of kids that are seeing therapists on medication, or just being able to have a specialized plan to help them cope, is 1,000 times better than what it was when I was a kid. So I'd say we're moving in the right direction.
What's your thoughts on anxiety versus now and then when you were a kid?
What do you mean?
Like, what did you think of anxiety, like, when you were a kid, or, like, when you first found out, like, when you were 19, and then now what do you think about it?
When I got diagnosed with anxiety, it was one of the biggest reliefs of my life, because I'd finally found what it was that was wrong with me. I mean, in 3rd grade, I was sick from school for a week, and I got so worried. Looking back at it now, I got so worried about having to go back to school. I ended up missing 3 months of school, lost 15% of my body weight, had a week-long stay in Children's Hospital, all sorts of medical tests done, for them to say, she just needs to go back to school. We can't find anything wrong with her. She needs to start eating. So to finally have something, and to go to counseling and learn some skills and learn some things just about how I view myself, how I relate with people, it was kind of life-changing. Because living the way that I had to live as a child was really sad. So it's I can't imagine. I'm happy that I was able to find something to help me now, because my mom wasn't able to get any type of help until she was probably my age. And so I can't imagine how the number of years she went.
Out of 10 Generation X adults in the U.S. reported that they had been diagnosed with anxiety at some point in their lives. Based on statistics, 27.1% of Generation X reported experiencing clinically significant anxiety symptoms. Generation Z is more likely to report and recognize mental health problems than the older generation. What is your anxiety like?
Honestly, it's almost always been pretty high, but I've learned how to mask it and suppress it pretty well over the years. I tend to overthink a lot. I usually feel on edge and paranoid, and I can have trouble with racing or irrational thoughts. I also get really bad anxiety sickness where it constantly feels like I'm gonna throw up even if I never do. Even when things are okay, it's just always something that I feel in the back of my mind. I usually have silent panic attacks where I feel all the symptoms of a panic attack internally, but I don't have any of the external symptoms. So I don't externally display them, but I still am having one. I usually feel the pain or a sensation my hands and my chest. I tend to have silent anxiety or panic attacks often, using a minimum of once a day or so. They can They can vary from lasting a few minutes, sometimes several hours, and then the panic attacks where I do display, the usual symptoms like hyperventilating or crying. Those are more rare for me. They happen maybe once every month or a few months. Those can last longer, but the most recent of that lasted maybe around 6 hours, I think. They tend to have lots of lingering anxiety and unease after them for a few days. And certain anxiety triggers can make me have another one because I tend to be more sensitive after one of those happen.
Growing up in the 2000s.
I feel like it's very connected because, in the past, people, they'd go home, they wouldn't see their friends, they might call them or go over to their place or something. But, now communication is a lot more instant. You can talk to friends that are states away. Some that you've never met in person. You can talk to friends that are states away within a matter of seconds. So within that kind of umbrella, people on social media are a lot more open to sharing their experiences because in the past, everyone's covering up problems like anxiety, depression to fit in and seem normal because it wasn't accepted, it wasn't normalized back then. But now with people being able to communicate, share their experiences with others, you can feel more seen and be able to be oh, you experience this too? I do too. And people are a lot more open and willing to talk about things that are wrong with them, going on in society. It's a lot of people wanting to take actual issues like mental health seriously instead of covering them up and hiding them because we all agree that it isn't good to keep doing that.
What was growing up in the 2000s generation with anxiety?
Kind of mixed. There's a lot more awareness and acceptance of anxiety now, but some people use that as a weapon to excuse their actions to others or dismiss others' anxiety is not that bad because of how common it is now. It's nice knowing that I'm not alone, but people don't understand the impact and severity of it.
What was your childhood like with anxiety?
It wasn't as bad or intense as it is now, or I just never fully recognized the signs. I never really learned about what anxiety was until later on. My family is the kind of family that likes to ignore mental health issues, so I wasn't really ever taught about what it is, and I didn't understand, what was going on with me. I had really bad insomnia, and it often took me 4 or 5 hours or more to finally fall asleep after I initially laid down to try to sleep because I would have racing paranoid thoughts, which I can probably attribute to ADHD as well, but I would have such vivid fears and worries and I couldn't understand why or talk about it with anyone.
Could you give us a memory of you with anxiety as a child?
It's really hard to think of anything specific because it was such a constant and normal thing for me. One thing that I guess comes to mind is something, it's a little weird. I used to be really afraid of spiders. Spiders. I used to be really afraid of spiders when I was a kid, mainly in elementary. Sometimes I couldn't sleep because I was absolutely convinced that there were spiders in my bed, or I would see black spotty shadows on the wall and be convinced it was a spider, even though, it was just my eyes playing tricks on me from the lighting. I'd be so afraid to move or breathe because I would be having repetitive thoughts of, they don't know I'm here, and if I do anything, they'll jump on me and attack me and bite me. To get even more specific, here, actually that's a good point to scroll. To get even more specific, our school library had those posters hanging up that was supposed to teach kids about, trusting what you see on the internet and not always believing that everything was true. But nowhere on the posters did it say anything about this. So the poster that was hanging up said, "Daddy Longlegs are the most poisonous spiders in the world." And me being the dumb, I hit the camera.
It's okay. So just start that sentence over.
Yeah. And it said, "Daddy Longlegs are the most poisonous spiders in the world." And me being the dumb kid that I was, completely believed that. Even though Daddy Longlegs aren't poisonous in the slightest. So one night I was literally convinced that one crawled up my leg and up my butt and it was going to poison me from the inside. My body literally created the sensations that it was actually happening. So I woke up my mom at midnight, 1 a.m. sobbing after I was finally able to move, and had her look up my butt with a flashlight because I was completely convinced there was a daddy long legs in there. And I didn't believe her when she found nothing and was awake the rest of the night.
How hard was it?
Like I said before, I have kind of a mixed experience. There's a lot more people who understand what I'm going through and how to help nowadays, but there's still a lot of people that don't take it seriously because of that.
Like your parents?
Yeah.
How is your anxiety now?
Still about the same, maybe even more so now. It's a lot more realistic fears rather than, child fears of killer dinosaurs attacking. I can mask it a lot better, and I can mask it a lot better than I used to be able to, and repress a lot of the big blow-ups, but it's a lot more internal now rather than external. There's very little I don't get anxious about, but I've learned to just keep pushing through it and dealing with it as I go. If anything, it sometimes helps a lot because there's all these fake scenarios that I worry about, and a lot of them end up happening at some point. By then, I'm prepared for how I can handle them because I've come up with all of these possible solutions.
How do you cope with it now?
Distractions help me a lot. Finding something to do or hyper-focus on, like writing, art, gaming, or listening to music helps. Also, something that was really big for me as a kid was discovering horror. I used to be a really big wuss, but gradually getting more interested in watching horror games and movies helped me validate and release all of my anxious feelings in a controlled environment where I knew I was safe. I got to have an actual reason to be anxious instead of having no idea why or letting my anxiety latch onto something at random and then spiraling out of control. It was huge for me at the time. It was huge for me at the time. Horror doesn't really have that big of an impact anymore because of how much I've watched. I've gotten used to it, but it's still a big comfort to me now rather than something I can latch onto.
What's your thoughts on anxiety versus when you were a kid versus now?
I definitely understand it a lot more and know how serious it is. It's not just something small that I have to learn to get over. It's my brain being wired completely differently from other people. People who say it's all in your head to someone with a mental illness don't understand that that's just the same as saying asthma's all in your lungs. Yeah, that's where it exists, but it doesn't mean it's not real.
What's your thoughts on medication for anxiety?
I think it's very, very important. And it's important to find the right one that's right for you. Some people don't need medication, but others, it can be a lifesaver. I personally can't be on medication because of my current living situation, but I know I'm going to jump on it the first chance I get. Medication helps regulate the parts of your brain that it's unable to do itself or produces certain chemicals that people with anxiety physically lack.
Statistics report that 61% of Generation Z has been diagnosed with anxiety. Anxiety disorders are the most common mental health concern in the United States, affecting approximately 19.1% of adults.